But welcome. Glad to be here. I'm Scott Walters, rector here at Calvary Church, and it's really a thrill to be in this space. I'm going to give a shout out to Catherine Bush, who's dutifully being a good friend and masking it, but she should be up here, but she's being responsible and not. So she's kind of prepared this conversation a little bit for us. The way this works, if you haven't done this with us at Calvary, is we record a live podcast on Wednesday nights as part of the Lenten preaching series. That means that we're not pretending we're in some perfect studio someplace. The idea is we want to capture actual people in conversation, and you're some of those people. So, if they're hilarious, laugh hysterically if you feel led. If you fall into the aisles weeping, do that. Do the things. But we're glad to have you here. Respond as you would. We'll have a conversation for up until about 7 o'clock. And at 7 o'clock, we want to make sure there's time for you to ask your questions that you have about things that either you brought with you here tonight or that came up along the way as the conversation unfolded. So make note of those, either physically or in your mind, and we'll love to hear from you around 7 o'clock and talk a little bit more. What am I forgetting, Catherine? Novel is here. We're so glad to have one of our favorite local bookstores. Tonight is our favorite local bookstore. Novel. Great folks. They've got lots of books from all kinds of speakers, multiple books from our speakers over there, and support their good work. Memphis is better because Novel is in it. Full stop. Okay, so I'm going to get started. When we've got folks following us on live stream as well. And this will be off to, you can come back to it as well if you choose, both on the podcast or on live stream.
Are our mics on now? I don't think, okay.
Are we on now,
there
Sam?
We
are we on? Okay. Are we good? Noah? All right. I'll kick us off and then we'll start this conversation. This is Dialogue, a podcast of the 100-year-old Lenten preaching series recorded live at Calvary Episcopal Church in Memphis. I am Scott Walters, rector here at Calvary, and my guests tonight are the Reverend Winnie Varghese and Dr. Brian McLaren. Winnie is a beloved preacher, teacher, and writer. She has been a leading voice on issues including mass incarceration, systemic racism, gender, sexuality, and LGBTQ issues, immigration, many others. She currently serves as rector of St. Luke's Episcopal Church in Atlanta. Prior to St. Luke's, Winnie served as priest for ministry and program at Trinity Church, Wall Street, and at rector of St. Luke's in the Bowery, a great funky parish down there in the Bowery in New York as well. She was chaplain at Columbia University and UCLA. Spent some of her childhood in India, where her parents immigrated from to the United States. Brian McLaren's an author, speaker, activist, public theologian. He's also a core faculty member of the Living School and a podcaster with Learning How to See, which are part of the Center for Action and Contemplation, which I'm guessing some folks here know about that amazing organization as well. His newest books are Faith After Doubt and Do I Stay Christian? There are many other books before these, including A Generous Orthodoxy, even a couple works of fiction, I think. I'm told he was also an English teacher at one point as well. Welcome to you both. It's so good to be with you in conversation here tonight.
We're happy to be here.
Good. So we're going to start with maybe some ideas about what's broken in the world. Brian preached today. Winnie will preach tomorrow. I don't know you really well, but I know you well enough that both of you are truthful about what's broken in the world, and you're also hopeful people that think even Christian people might have something to offer to a broken world. So I wonder how you'd start to talk about what you see as broken or breaking in this world, and maybe some signs of some mending as well. Can we start there?
Is there anything that's not broken in the world right now? I started to make a list, and it's almost everything, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like, oh my God. My family's from India, and so I watch Indian politics just because I care about my family, and it's like a mirror of what's happening here, except in a place that you'd think would that has socialist values, that is a majority poor nation, and the same kind of, just kind of ginned up bigotry and nationalism that is for one small group of people, and calling that the economic victory of the nation, on the backs of 95% of the population. It's almost easier for me to see there because it's far, but it's not different. The way that's implemented, who's terrorized, who's afraid, who's hungry, who's discriminated against, how the discrimination works, it seems maybe somewhat, well, you'll know, I don't know. Is there a reason that it's so similar all over the world? It's gender, hunger, work, poverty, discrimination, caste discrimination, race discrimination. Why is that?
I think Scott knows that, but when you said that, Winnie, I thought of everybody should go home tonight and look up online, watch Bob Dylan playing his song "Everything's Broken." It would be a good sort of meditative experience to sit with Bob for a few minutes. It really is spooky how similar it is. I feel like we're in this giant psychological experiment. For the first time in history, we've linked all of our brains through these things. And for the first time in history, we have generations who are knowing that we could blow ourselves up with nuclear weapons. And for the first generations in history, we are beginning to understand what we're doing to the global environment. And for the first time in history, we've run out of land. Like, human beings have spread across the earth, and we used to solve our problems. One group would solve their problems by stealing the land of some other group, and of course that's still a rather popular thing to do among certain countries. But I just feel like we're at this point where stress levels go up, and I think, I don't mean to sound scary, but I think part of why we're seeing this happen is we thought democracy would solve all of our problems, and we're finding out that democracy solves some problems, but there are some problems democracy hasn't figured out how to solve yet. And the kind of sort of beginner, second-grade democracy that we have isn't fortified to deal with this set of problems.
And part of that challenge, right, because I keep comparing it to India, is that we haven't fully lived into, we haven't realized our democracy.
Yes.
So many disenfranchised people, right?
Yeah. And in fact, if we just think, democracy wasn't originally started to give everyone a voice. It was started to give just men a voice, and just white men a voice, and just white landowning men a voice. And so, we're running out of a runway to get democracy working the way it needs to work. And right at a time where the people with the most wealth and power just have gotten new tools at their disposal to consolidate their wealth and power. Imagine being the richest person in the world and owning one of the most powerful social media platforms in the world. If that were ever to happen, we'd be in a lot of trouble. Or one of the richest and one of the people with the least conscience and sense of decency were to own a huge cable news station that was only worried about profits and careless about the truth. So you put those together, and that's some pretty serious broken stuff.
And if you saw them watching the Super Bowl together, that would really creep you out.
Oh my gosh, I couldn't imagine that.
Would never happen.
Okay. We've lowered expectations for a chipper conversation tonight, but it's really helpful to start here and being truthful about this. Brian, you were talking today about risk.
Yeah.
And the way that we've lost this sense of accepting that there's a certain amount of risk in human relationship and human life, and that when we displace it either in the direction of despair or a Pollyanna hopefulness, we displace this important tension that we have in our relationships. And just hearing you all talk in this, we're talking about something that's gone wrong in our relationships with one another, with the earth, with people, with trust. I just wonder if there's anything in that starts to
Yeah.
put some texture on what we're talking about in a way that we might say, how would we start to rebuild some trust, some relationships in a world that's grown hardened and cynical? I don't trust the systems you've described. What seems to be rewarded?
Yes.
What kind of behavior? What kind of fear? Thoughts about putting a little more flesh on that in a way that we could start to say, how might faithful people be part of the healing?
So I wonder, and I think, because I'm like this, I wonder if our need to find a solution is part of, quickly, is part of the problem.
Oh, yeah.
I think part of what's happening in our country, actually, and I would again compare this to India, is that the people that have not had voice are, population-wise, are emerging. That there's a very clear struggle for who will be in power, what power, who will have power. And here it's that demographically we're shifting radically, right? And I feel like, so my gut is let's get organized. We know a new story of us. Let's enact it. But the truth is we don't. I mean, just the fact of diversity is not a story of us. And I feel like movements are asking us to, not have urgency around crisis, because there's plenty of crisis right now, real lives, real water, real environment. But to maybe assume that we've got a lot to learn to figure out what that story of us is, and it's going to take some time. And I think we're living out a reaction to the civil rights movement, which was the moment something hit after the Civil War. The kind of timeline we're looking at is so long, and I don't think that's for apathy, but I actually think COVID times kind of brought me to this, that this time of mending community and being together and thinking about belonging and meaning. If you had told me church was where people go to make meaning, when people did tell me that 10 years ago, it's like, we can do a lot better than that. That's so boring, just so dull. And now I would say, yeah, actually, yes, let's do that. Let's come together, because we don't know who we are. We know who we are with each other, and it's different than who we've been. And I'd say, of course, we need to be involved in all kinds of things, and I think this is going to take a lot of time and be really painful and shift the ground under us. I don't think it's just bringing some more people along. I think we have to fundamentally change. And all the folks you were talking about know that.
Yeah. Yeah, when you say that, Winnie, I think a little quote from Wendell Berry came to mind. I won't get this exactly right, but he said something like, when we realize we don't know what to do, maybe that's when our work really begins. And if one of our sort of cardinal sins of this modern era is arrogance, it would be nice if we could all say, yeah, we're really arrogant, we need to change. But it tends to be, when you're arrogant, the only way you lose your arrogance is by humiliation and failure. And I just think to myself, these last 20 years have been for this country, have been a really great opportunity to be humiliated. And we have a whole lot of people who are fighting the humbling that comes from humiliation and failure. But it's probably doing its work. And as you say, in a certain sense, you can't take a shortcut to get the easy version of humility. If any of us who are in recovery understand that idea of hitting bottom, you really have to reach a place where you feel your powerlessness and that it's not working. And when you said that, Winnie, about story, about finding a story, meaning in a story, those of us in the Christian faith, this is one of our struggles, because we have this incredible repository of stories in the Bible, but we inherited a way of interpreting the Bible that gave us a certain version of the story that is, in my opinion, is super highly problematized right now. And so part of the struggle, this is one of the broken things, but it's something also that maybe is in the process of being healed the only way it can, is that when people start to feel that Christian version, that version of the Christian story you're telling doesn't work, or it makes things worse, then they just want to throw out Christianity. Or they double down on the old story, and I think we need more people to say, no, there's a new story here for us to rediscover in our own resources. Yeah.
I love that, and I love pairing that with Winnie. So this question around urgency really is catching my attention. And Christians who have been bemoaning the demise of Christendom for decades, who are used to just being, it's the last Christian's going to show up at the last church in 20 years, and then we're all going to be done. There's a weird relationship with urgency. Mm-hmm. Brian, you care a lot about climate. We can't seem to muster an urgency to kind of act now. And I'm also thinking about Tyree Nichols in Memphis, where there was in a moment an urgency that was so infected and misspent that it led to the death of a person by the people. People feeling an urgency to do justice in this moment that was a distorted vision of it. And so you've got me thinking about urgency and how we actually as a church maybe take time. You're asking us to step back. We may have to step back and discern, form community. What does that look like? How do we balance what's urgent and has to happen today and what we actually have to step back because we might do the wrong thing really hard?
Yeah, Tyree Nichols is a great example of this. I wanted to talk a little bit about it tomorrow, which with a lot of humility because I'm not from here, but I'm from Atlanta, and I think there's slow work. So for those of us that don't come from evangelical traditions, I would, some of us come from traditions of, and many of you probably like we know how to turn our Bible upside down, and flip it around and look at it in different ways. And reading the creation story in this moment, the ways that we like this. So I know how to do that. But we just had to read the creation story for something, and all of us kind of landed in the same spot around noticing ecology in it and noticing gender in it, and and ha-adam again, and that wasn't the thing that was popping up at a different time, and so. I think we are people that have every tool we need, and there's some slow, repeat work for us to do. And the great movements in history have never been led by a majority ever. It was always a small minority, and we tell our history in ways in this country that make us, and maybe it's just that it's how power works, make it feel impossible to actually make any change. And the truth is, it was always a small group of people that people thought were out of their minds that made change. And policing is one of those things, right? So in Atlanta, they're about to build a massive police training center. In and of itself, everybody should be trained for their job, so that's neutral. But it's in a forest, and Atlanta is a city of forests, and this is preserved forest. So they're going to knock down the thing they love the most. They can agree they love the most in that city to build this training center because we have crime. That's the logic of all of it. And it seems so clear to me, this is the kind of moment you want to interrupt and assume, and let this take some time. If we're going to be a just city, and I want to assume that everyone working on this wants a just and safe city, we can't quickly solve the problems of 400 years by building a new building real fast. I can kind of guarantee we're going to make them worse, right? So for that, but to go in as community leaders that say we don't actually have the solution, we're pretty sure that's not the solution. And then could we take some time because we'd like to actually build a solution? It's a different way to think about organizing than I'm used to, which is we go in knowing exactly what we want, and then we fight till we get it. And in the world of things that are humiliating, feeling lost in that landscape as a 50-year-old, feels very humiliating. I think at 25, I'd know exactly what I thought about this. I don't know. Even at 45, I might have. And I don't mean that wisdom comes with years. I mean more that the landscape has changed really radically in a way that I think is also very exciting. Maybe it means there's more possibility of change. I don't know.
Yeah, did I hear that that some of the people who participated in the protests about that, to preserve that forest, are being charged with domestic terrorism?
Yes, and that policy was put in into, like, that is this president. This president has made that possible.
Wow.
It's a scary thing when protest gets called domestic terrorism.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. In Atlanta.
These are kids, Atlanta, the city of the civil rights movement, proud of that about themselves, too busy to fight, right? Yeah, and I mean, to your point, right, that movement is to highlight the destruction of the forest.
Yeah.
That should catalyze that city like nothing else across racial lines.
Yeah.
And it has, and something has happened to us over the last couple of years, all of us, I think, in the country. It's not doing that. There's fear of, I mean, being called a terrorist is terrifying, and someone died out there, and there are no cameras were on, so, you know, it's.
So that's so disheartening, because how many stories have we told in the last years where we said, well, we are divided and we are estranged, but at least we can gather around this.
Yeah.
It's a virus. It's name the thing that seems so self-evident. It's our park. It's the thing we could. That's really disheartening and difficult to think about how we start to rebuild trust. I mean, I'll make it even harder. Yeah. Let's say institutional religion.
Yeah.
Is there any place in this landscape that even institutions or like one of these, what are the pitfalls and the possibilities? Is it relevant? I mean, is it going to be a different kind of organization that needs to meet this moment, or do we have something to offer?
So I'd really like to hear what you two would say about that.
I mean, what experience? I wonder what experience you're having. I'm guessing it's like mine. We are baptizing adults at the Easter Vigil who have no religious background, none, and they're getting baptized at the Vigil so they can be confirmed because they want in. So it's not like it's 1,000 people, but for an Episcopal, and we're a pretty big Episcopal church, like we're a church like you all. I was a chaplain for 10 years. I've not seen this number of people, young people, show up and say that this tradition has meaning. They've come in for all kinds of reasons, no background at all, and they're not captivated by our liturgy. They don't think, you know, they're putting up with it. There's something else going on. You know, they're not like, oh, this is Shakespearean. That's not what's happening. This isn't aesthetic. Like they want to be a part of that community. There's something happening in that room that they want to be a part of, and are willing to do these bizarre things with us to be a part of, right? If you could stay up really late on a Saturday, we've got some water and
fire.
And some fire. We're gonna light a fire. We don't really know how.
That's right. But what's the thing? If it's not the liturgy, if it's not the things we've been saying, there's an ancient groundedness.
And I don't want to say it's not completely.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm being a little bit, but it's not the usual thing we say draws people to us. I don't think though I think they're fine within all those frameworks. I think they are looking for communities talking about the real things, and they are reorganizing their lives from scratch for belonging and meaning, which is associated with all kinds of values, including social justice values, but interpersonal values and how you deal with one another, and communities, you know, that believe in true things. And you're having to go look and find that because the world is social media, and they were isolated in their apartments by themselves for 2 years. I find that they're going out to find that, and we're getting people that are coming from evangelical communities who are really disillusioned by that tradition, or by that practice. And again, aren't saying, oh, but if only there was incense, I'd be an evangelical. Like, they're not coming for those things. They're really serious Christians, and they want to be in a community that takes that seriously. Yeah. And so they told us we were going to die, I think, in the 60s as well. Yeah. I think for certain people, it doesn't have to be for everyone, for certain people, I think these institutions make a lot of sense, and I think they always will. And then I think there's a certain capacity for social movement, social change that comes from these institutions, and of conversation in the civic realm that these kinds of institutions have that free church traditions don't. And for me, is a very, very high value. What's happening here?
Well, I agree with, we see it too. We had, I met one parishioner who came during COVID online, and the first time I met him in the flesh was when the bishop laid hands on him and confirmed. It was really interesting to encounter that. But the piece I might add to that too is, I think I have a lot of places where I can go align with people who are for the things in the world I'm for and can fix it in the ways I know it needs to be fixed.
Yep.
But I'm experiencing people coming saying, I think I'm part of what's broken, and I think I'm confused, and I hurt, and I fail,
Yeah.
and I'd like to be, I'm putting words in my mouth, but it's part of why I'm a Christian. It's like, I have a feeling like we have to be in this so that we can grow and be challenged and changed because we're part, what the systemic, conversation about systemic racism for me just falls right into ancient conversations about the way sin doesn't just move through my mind and choices, but in what I want and how I'm in relationship. And so those I find real freshness, and people are coming for a humble conversations about how might we be better? How might we heal our relationships with the neighbors right over there? Anyway,
Yeah.
I think that's a piece of it too. That's
Absolutely.
ancient tradition of confession, but
Yeah. You know, as probably most of you all know, I grew up evangelical, which is really just another name for fundamentalist. And I am such a big believer in liturgy for so many reasons. I attend an Episcopal church. I love the Episcopal church. But if I could make a plea to institutions, and this is where I see this happening already, but it would be that the folks who are liturgical and the folks who want to keep every word the same and believe everything is just right the way it is, let them do that at some service. But some of those other folks who appreciate the value of liturgy, I wish that we could give everybody an ordination who wants it to become the Thomas Cranmers of the 21st century, to say, how can we say what needs to be said for our survival in these times in the beautiful and poetic and poignant and pointed language that it needs. And if we can get people for 50 minutes or 60 minutes or 74 minutes, how can we maximize that time as a spiritual formation and movement building experience? Because to me, we're in such matters of survival now. And the good news is, so I attend a little Episcopal church in Southwest Florida. I travel a lot, so I'm probably not there. If I'm there 20 Sundays a year, it's a lot over these last 15 years. And I've watched that happen in my congregation. I don't know how it is in different dioceses, but in our diocese, they have kind of a don't ask, don't tell policy when it comes to liturgy innovation. So everyone knows not to ask permission because you won't be granted it. But so what's happening is one of the priests at our parish, she just goes and finds great stuff, and it's out there, and brings it in, and you can feel almost a groan in the room when people say the words that are dying to be said in their hearts. Like just as an example, growing up evangelical, we, when I first became part of an Episcopal community, and we said the confession of sin, I memorized it. I sin a lot, so I need all the help I can get. But I memorized that beautiful confession of sin. But now I realize that confession of sin is numbing for so many people. It's their way to not think about any sins they actually commit, And I think to myself, and that's not to mean, I love Thomas Cranmer's words, and thought, word, and deed by what we have done, what we have left undone, is very comprehensive. It just doesn't make anybody think of racism. And it just doesn't make anybody think of hoarding wealth. And it's beautiful, poetic words that make sure that we don't think about the things that actually some part of us wants to think about, So we have this priest who's retired, and she works at our congregation, and she works for free, so she doesn't care if she gets fired. And it's just, and she told me this, she's not afraid to push the limit. And and you can just feel the groan of people saying, I know this is going to make so-and-so mad, but we need to say it anyway. And that's the kind of space that I think is happening a lot out there. I'll tell you one other thing. I don't know if we have any Methodists in the room, but a lot of y'all know that the Methodists are going through what Episcopalians went through however many years ago. And I think most Episcopal congregations would say that it was painful to have that rupture years ago, but that in a certain sense, people are able to get on with the work they really want to do, with the people they really want to do that work with. And the United Methodists are as big in the United States as all other mainline Protestants put together. So they're a big deal. And if 60 or 70 or 80% of them stay together, and after this rupture, they're able to sort of dust themselves off, because, you know, you have to do a little bit of grieving and licking some wounds and catching up on sleep and all that. But once they're ready, I mean, they could get a fresh start.
Sure.
And that could be a big deal. So in a certain sense, even when you see things breaking, the breaking might be a very necessary thing that you would never wish on anybody, but once it happens, you say, well, look, now that it's broken, let's make the best of it and see what can happen.
Stephanie Spellers last year has a great thing about the breaking of the vase for the perfume for Jesus. Is like, what precious thing will we break to allow the next thing to happen?
Yes.
Well, the institution piece is interesting in probably lots of levels. To me, I came out of an evangelical tradition, non-denominational, and so I was partly drawn to the guardrails, even though I'm not preternaturally drawn to guardrails. I'm like, question the rules and whatnot. But the liturgy itself, the fact that I can't decide what to say next, opened something up into me for prayer. At the same time, I think what you're saying is exactly right, that how is there this tension between Scott and Winnie just don't wing it, and yet within those parameters, there needs to be room for the people to move, for the Spirit to move. I'll give you an example that just happened here that may be too fresh. I don't know if it's a good idea to talk about it, but here we are. We had John Meacham on Ash Wednesday here in the church, and John is an Episcopalian, and when he agreed to come, he said, I'd like to preach on Ash Wednesday. Usually that's not where we start our Lenten preaching series, because Ash Wednesday's a different kind of service, right? You need to know what you're in for if you're coming for Ash Wednesday. To be told you're dead, you're going to die. Wonderful service, had a lot of people here. We had a lot of Jewish brothers and sisters here that are deeply connected to this place and were hurt to hear about the hypocrites in the synagogue without context. Wow. And I was hurt. Micah Greenstein, rabbi here, who filled this place last Friday, is a dear friend, and we went back and forth that night and talked about we didn't get to choose that gospel. This is our liturgy and our bringing it into this, and bringing it into conflict with people I didn't want to hurt.
Yes.
Now, there was some grace in that, but it sure hurt getting there and having conversations to say, how could we keep this alive? How can we still tell that story again? And also acknowledge that it's been weaponized against people. I'm sorry, I'm not supposed to be talking this much. But that tension between the guardrails and the freedom, you know, how do you navigate that? You've articulated how you've seen it done. Have you seen moments of genius and grace? And
so, I was a college chaplain for 10 years, which the whole job is to make it up, right? Nobody, I come from, my family's from very liturgical traditions, but the denomination, like the Orthodox become Martha, like there's different movements because the Bible is introduced. Like the reforms come because text is brought into the local language. So I probably hold it a little more lightly than I should. And I was the rector of St. Mark's in the Bowery. And St. Mark, so our old prayer book is from the 20s, right? Our current prayer book is from the 70s. So St. Mark's in the Bowery, and there were prayer book studies. So every decade, volumes of these things would come out. And we were really serious, frankly, about liturgy as a church. And so you would get new archaeological work and historical work and these prayer book studies. Some of you probably have the files in your house. I mean, they're amazing, right? And they would be the things we put together to make the new prayer book. And we don't fund that anymore in the Episcopal Church. So in all our lightening up the systems and being nimble rubbish, I think, we have, like, who's going to do it if we don't do it, right? If we don't have people working on that. So we don't have it anymore. So we hope we have scholars that are doing it. We cross our fingers. We don't support them really in doing it. But so St. Mark's gets bored between 1928 and 1970, whatever, very St. Mark's to get bored. And they produced a prayer book. Like, they didn't just write some liturgies, they made a book. I learned about this, I didn't know, because a priest who had been in California forever was from Ireland, and in the Church of Ireland, the Anglican Church in Ireland, the Protestant church, he had grown up using the St. Mark's prayer book. So I had seen one Eucharistic prayer and a post-communion prayer, but he had the whole prayer book. It's stunning, definitely of its time. I think it was the 50s. I mean, you could hear the time, but it had, I think it was the 50s. Could have been a little bit later, but not much. It wasn't the 70s, right? And though they kept making liturgy, so there's plenty of liturgy that kept happening, but one of the St. Mark's Masses, one of them, at the end of the Eucharistic prayer, at the post-communion prayer, so this vision of the kingdom had this line, that I will never forget, laughter in the hallways, as like one of the signs of the kingdom. So, but do you hear that? Like, it brings it into a public school, a tenement, public housing. It brings it into modern architecture, a hallway. Yes. Laughter in the hallways. You can hear it, right? Yes. I think we should, I'm with you, I think we should be writing liturgy all the time. The reason we have good liturgy is because we write it all the time, historically. That's how you get it. And it is particular for every moment, and then we get caught in how we change it, right? And, you go to the Church of England, frankly, go to the mothership, and they're doing a ton of different things on Sunday morning. So we had a bishop, can't remember who it was, who was the rector of Trinity way back in the day, who said it would be our formalism, our attachment to the formality of the liturgy that would be the defining feature of Episcopalians, not our outspokenness. Think of all the things you'd want to define us as a denomination. And so I remember reading, I think it was Bishop Hobart, reading it thinking, what a horrible thing to say about people, and then thinking, oh wait, we are like that, aren't we? Me too, like formalism, it's not tradition, it's not that it's ancient, it's not even, it's the formality of the liturgy. But I think, and we have been told since the last prayer book that it is the book that unites us. That is not how, there's been a breadth to how we think about that across the communion and in our history that we've lost in this church. We are in a fight to the end on the book, and I think it's too bad, because we should be thinking as creatively as we can about the words we need right now, and we have the poets and we have the theologians and we've got the musicians. Yeah. The Presbyterians shouldn't have a better hymnal than us. That's not right, Like we've got the resources, but I think, frankly, we're tired of fighting. So part of what happens when you have the big fight is it's so exhausting to go after each other. And while we feel like we're having this conversation internally, the world is breaking. Yeah. So what are we doing? But I want a line like laughter in the hallways in my post-communion prayer.
Yeah. Well, where are you seeing that? That's the 50s.
Where
are we seeing God?
Well, like what you've described, everyone I know is messing around with. There's at least one service on Sunday morning, at least one on Sunday, if not more, where we're trying to be as expansive as possible. I don't want anyone to walk in and it used to just be gender inclusion, but now in this moment of really understanding what it means and hearing the voices of people who say they're not binary, who are trans, like that's a whole other level of looking at our language and looking at race and color and how that happens in language. And not to mention like who we think God is and what God's characteristics are. So you can't. I don't live in a world where I can just read the prayer book and I do it, but I mean that I can do that, and like you, because I'll have to say sorry later, right? So we have, and I don't know a bishop that doesn't say, in the House of Bishops they talk about this, that where they see vitality in parishes are in parishes that are playing and creative and trying to speak words they want their children to hear and be formed by.
Oh, beautiful.
That's fantastic. And even speaking to a broader culture, it's not reductive in censorship, it's expansive. That very word to say that the idea of taking in more perspectives can expand what we're doing, what we're saying, not looking over our shoulders lest we offend. It's actually taking in this positive aspect of God is a different.
Just to speak,
Yeah.
then what you just said about Ash Wednesday. So there's been this critique in our church of kind of the political correctness of changing language and in the text and in the Bible, especially for Holy Week readings. Mm-hmm. And this is where we just don't know our history and the power of liturgy, the real power of liturgy to cause harm, right? Holy Week, when those readings were read, right, is when pogroms started historically in Europe, and we don't know this history. Like, I feel like you should hear that once and be ready to change it all.
Yes.
Like, think about think about it, and that didn't happen to us, right? We've heard it once, we understand it, and we're saying, oh, but we like our translation. We've lost our minds. Like, what are we talking about? So anyway.
Could I do something sort of fun about what we're talking about?
Let's do fun stuff, yeah.
Well, I mean, not that this wasn't fun.
Yes.
This was really fun. But we had talked that we might want to bring a poem to share tonight.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about that this might be a poem that maybe I could share, so I made sure I had it on my computer. But I'm just thinking this would really be fun in light of what we just talked about. Y'all have Padraig Ó Tuama coming, and of course Padraig is a wonderful poet, and I can't remember. I read an article once where they said Padraig that in some ways poetry is the prayer of agnostics, which
nice.
I thought was interesting. But there is a kind of religious language that says to people, if you want to say this with us, you're lying. So either be quiet or pretend, or lie. But there's another kind of poetry that goes out and finds people where they are with laughter in the hallways. And when I first heard Thomas Cranmer, that's what I felt I was being brought in. So this is a poem that is a secular poem. In fact, it has a naughty word in it that I'm going to edit just out of respect.
Omid Safi was here. He said all of them last week.
Oh, okay. Well, you're good. Then I will. I'll keep it. Then. Okay. So you don't have to say it. I'll say it. But it's from sort of a hippie from the 1960s named Diane de Prima. Some of you might know her amazing poetry. And this is called Life Chant. And it is a poem that was read in sort of beat poetry settings, It is one of the most beautiful liturgical experiences I ever have. And there's a way to read it liturgically. So the first part of this, your line that you say is, may it continue. So if we get this going right, I'll do my line, you do your line, and we just let it go. So we'll give it a try. It'll be a little bit awkward, but we'll get in the rhythm. And just both say it and observe what happens to you as you say it. Maybe nothing, but something good happens for me. Okay, here it is. Cacophony of small birds at dawn. Sticky monkey flowers on bare brown hills. Bitter taste of early miner's lettuce. Music on city streets in the summer nights. Kids laughing on roofs, on stoops, on the beach, in the snow. Triumphal shout of the newborn. Deep silence of great rainforests. Fine austerity of jungle peoples. Rolling fuck of great whales in turquoise ocean.
May it continue.
Clumsy splash of pelican in smooth bays.
May it continue.
Astonished human eyeball squinting through eons at astonished nebula who squint back.
May it continue.
Clean snow on the mountain.
May it continue.
Fierce eyes clear of light of the aged.
May it continue.
Rite of birth and naming. Rite of instruction. Rite of passage. Love in the morning, love in the noon sun. Love in the evening among the crickets. Long tales by fire, by window, in fog, in dust, on the mesa. the night music, grunt of mating hippo, giraffe, foreplay for snow leopard,
May it continue.
screeching of cats on the backyard fence, and it goes on from there. But I just find when I hear that and when I read that, when I imagine it being said in a beautiful cathedral or in a beat poet coffee shop in 1962, it just feels magic to me. Yeah.
Works both places.
Yeah.
You should do that at your vigil, isn't it?
Yeah, at the vigil, yeah.
It's like that.
And could I just say something about that? So, you know, I'm a Christian. I love God. I love Jesus. I love the whole thing, right? But there's something that happens when people pray that puts all of the responsibility on God. Do this, make this happen, change this, fix this. And when a bunch of people say, may it continue, it's like, instead of saying, God, will you fix this? It's us saying, I'm putting my voice into this too. Now, I think prayer should be that. I think that's what prayer really is. Prayer is not telling God what to do. It's sort of saying, by my voice being in this, I'm putting my skin in the game too. But boy, it would be nice to get to a place where that happened. So,
Amen.
Yeah.
Amen.
We did a litany at St. Mark's. I don't know where, I'm sure it came from somewhere else. But it was for All Saints' Day. And it was all the saints, like we did all the historic saints, but also all your people. We did All Saints and All Souls together, and our neighborhood people. And the response was presente, which just puts it right back in your body. And so we would just read some names, and it might have Cesar Chavez, and it might have Gregory of Nyssa, and then it was very, and it just went on and on, and then people invoking their families, and that as you're saying, the power of liturgy, right? Yeah. Yeah.
That's the work of the people, yeah. And if it can be an old word that reconnects me to someone centuries ago and brings it into that community of saints,
Yeah.
but yeah, to bring the natural world, to bring the actual neighbors outside our doors in Memphis or in downstairs into the liturgy has got to be our task. Oh, it's 7:00. This is wonderful to talk to you all. I need to I want to open it up though to these other folks who've been thinking and listening and praying along tonight. First of all, thank you both. Let's say thank you for your. Robin has a microphone back there. Who's got a question to continue this lovely conversation? I know they're out there.
I have a colleague who has said that he's a Wesley scholar, but he once said that there was something he wished Wesley had not said, and that was think and let think. So I'd like to hear what you all have to say about Wesley's statement and also about my friend's desire.
Think and let.
Think and let think? Is that what you said? Think and let think. I don't know that one.
I don't know what does it mean?
Yeah, I mean, my first thought is I'd love to know the context of when and why Wesley said it. I'd love to know the context of why your friend didn't like it. I'm trying to think what the opposite or the option would be. Don't think and don't let others think. It seems like a pretty popular one. So I like Wesley's better than that. But I wonder if he was also worried about everything being about your ideas or your thoughts or your interpretations, which has been a big preoccupation in Protestantism. Yeah.
I'd be curious too. I mean, sometimes back to the liturgy conversation, sometimes we assume we think with our brains.
Yeah.
And we don't bring our bodies into actual, whatever I happen to think up here is pretty late in the game.
Yes.
I've already felt, experienced,
Yes.
and then I rationalize it.
Yes.
I rationalize it, and I don't know if he was onto that, but I do believe there's some, we overrate the rational mind as to actually seeing things for what they are.
So first, an expression of gratitude for the conversation and naming and connecting some dots between a conversation that acknowledges that started in the brokenness, right? And I know you talked about gazing earlier today, Brian, but also like looking at reality and accept that this is the real world, right? And then a conversation that held that and moved to liturgy and playfulness and creativity. And I'm this is maybe more of a comment than a question, but this idea of integrating these things, right? Of not saying like, oh, let's put art and poetry on this shelf, and let's put societal ills on this shelf. But instead, how do these things play together, to go back to the playfulness and the creativity? I don't know. Somewhere there's a question, or you can just pick a word and talk about it. But
That's a good question.
That's what my mind is.
Do they matter to each other? I hear you
They do,
asking
yeah.
that.
Yeah, at this time when so many people, think they're sort of writing the death certificate for the church or religion or whatever, I mean, you just think, are people going to give up on meaning? Mm-hmm. Where are the other spaces and communities that are taking seriously the storytelling you mentioned earlier, Winnie, and are in a sense have the centuries-old habits of bringing art and social justice and lament and gratitude and all of these different elements together? So, oh my goodness, so much potential. And those of us who are already experiencing the good of that in faith communities, we already taste it. And then I think many of us have a sense, and we're just scratching the surface. We could be digging in even deeper.
Yeah, so at St. Luke's there's such a church thing. Basically, we have a hallway that we've called a gallery, like an art gallery. It's a hallway, and we laugh in it. It's a hallway, and they've named it after. It's wonderful. Like they named it after people. They painted it. They put up the stuff you do so you can hang things. And so the exhibit that's up right now is of maybe 20 or 30 pen and ink kind of drawings of people that have came to the homeless ministry in the 80s. Which was just founded by some people at church. It's an urban church. There were people that were hungry, so some women started to cook food, and it's turned into it's its own separate thing now. And there are just hundreds of these images that some of the art. This one woman from the church just started to draw people. It's just a thing she knew how to do, and you can imagine it being something that was kind of mocked or just strange. And she was a known artist in the city. She just drew people. So we've got all these drawings. They're huge. They're beautiful, of people with their 1980s. AIDS activist buttons on and their leather jackets, and they're hungry, like they're coming to a ministry like this, looking you in the eye or not, and you can feel them in the drawing. She's very good. They're just hanging in the back, and like the power of that work, right, and of her meeting this need with the thing she had, which means that for us 40 years later, we get to remember that moment and be, frankly, that our own mundane meetings might, kind of are given purpose again. All that I think is actually what church does best. Mm-hmm. We actually say, "Come, bring your Play-Doh, and let's do that." Or we do these little things that make these profound connections. Yeah. And as you said, where in life do you get to do that?
Yeah. What was that? Yeah. Was it Elvis Costello song, "All This Useless Beauty"? It brings me back to your initial point of how do we step back from thinking I know the solution now and create this beautiful thing that meets a need we might not even know how to talk about. Sure feels like we're trying to be too efficient for such solutions, which would be very sad. Who else has some questions out here? This is excellent. There's one. Heather.
Hi, I'm Heather. Thank you for a wonderful conversation tonight. I love you talking about art. Today I was at a meeting, and this lady who's a new director of a garden that they do in Binghamton, and they have children involved. Anyway, it's just really, I haven't been to visit, but I can't wait to go see. But I was a member of another church. I was Methodist, born and raised, and now Episcopalian. But so it was heartbreaking for me to see what was happening to the church. And so anyway, at our church where I used to go, we had a program where we would feed some of the homeless people or the unsheltered people, and they would come in and we would serve food, and then we would do an art project with them. And I just, I was thinking about how we do that with kids and some of the youth ministries and things like that. And in our Sunday school, the kids bring him a project, and it's meaningful. My son doesn't want me to throw them away, even though we've got like piles of them. Somehow we're going to have to sift through these at some point. But, I kept thinking, it is an interesting idea to think about, like, maybe bringing that out in adults, like sometimes through art, or maybe doing some evening things or after church things that that have art, that bring conversation up about, that might be a new way to connect with people through art and through some creativity. So I don't know if you have any more thoughts on that, but I just appreciate you bringing that point up.
Let me just say, I imagine this is true of many different seminaries, but I lived in the D.C. area for many years, and Wesley Seminary in D.C., I imagine they still do this. They had a required course for every seminarian in art. And they said, if one of our most profound understandings of God is that God is the creator, that the Holy Spirit is the creative spirit, how can we claim to understand God if we never engage in creativity? So they wanted seminarians to experience creativity, because we would expect that is a way you experience God. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like, it's not just you're learning something about God, you're actually in the creative process experiencing God. And then you think about mission organizations or different orders of nuns whose entire orientation is toward service. I think of my dear friend Simone Campbell, an order of social service. And part of the idea is we believe you experience God in the act of serving. And so, yeah, I think I'm glad that rings true with you. And wouldn't it be interesting if that becomes an increasingly important part of our faith through this transition?
Yeah, there's a rector of St. Mark's in the Bowery in the early 1900s, which is what makes it the St. Mark's in the Bowery, we all know, who said something like, so the other side of this art piece, that that the arts would be the way that Americans in the 20th century access their spirituality. I think he's right about that.
Yeah. Patti Smith used to always show up down there on New Year's Eve, I think, right?
Yeah, she does. She still does. New Year's Day, she still does. Yeah.
But here we go. Oh, sorry.
Since earlier you all were talking about how to make the liturgy more like inclusive and expansive and everything, what would you all think about having kind of like a library of liturgies, since religion and spirituality can be such like intensely personal things, and people have so many different things that they prefer about one liturgy versus another, and that can mean a lot to them. What if churches had like a collection of liturgies written in different styles that they could kind of choose from and have like a rotating kind of schedule?
What would you think, Brian?
I love that idea. I love that idea. And, it's that sort of thing exists, but it's not centralized. And so you find different people have different little networks. They consult the New Zealanders for some of their contributions, and they consult St. Luke's they watch St. Luke's online to get ideas, and they watch Calvary to get some other ideas. So that exists, but I think the idea, and can I say, this really is an important idea. When you think about how our denominational histories contributed in American history to ethnic, language, cultural, and racial segregation. So a lot of people don't understand that there are whole Episcopal communities that are Scottish Episcopal, and there are others that are English Episcopal, and there are others, they have their own, that are Caribbean Episcopal. And so they had their own sort of tradition they brought in. And then there are a lot of people who don't know how much Lutheranism is connected with German immigrants or Swedish or Lutheran immigrants, so or Norwegian immigrants. And then you think of the ways that our segregated history kept white folk and black folk and Latine folk and, Asian folk in different communities because of language and segregation and so on. And now you think, maybe it's time for us to start creating libraries like that where we get to not appropriate, but share. And I think when you take something, it's different than when you offer something, when you receive something that's been offered. And so I love that idea, yeah.
And you've kind of that is the debate that our church is having right now, because you can go to the National Church's website and see everything that's approved, and it's pretty awesome, right? There are a lot of hymnals, there are a number of different versions of, enriching our worship is approved. There's now Rite 1 expansive, or inclusive, or expansive, Rite 1 expansive, Rite 2 expansive, and they're just barely inclusive is what I would call those. They're not really expansive. And the critique on the other side is, but our prayer book united us, right? The old prayer book had 2 ways to do the service, and we're united in that. And I think it's the dilemma of being American right now, right? That is there one way to be it? Is there one way to speak English? Is there one way to pray? Yeah. And of course the answer is no. That will not bring us together. It won't. But I respect that people were raised with that, right? That St. Mark's again, the German immigrants that moved to the Lower East Side, were the deaconesses reached out to them to help them become anglicized so they could be proper Americans, to stop speaking German, to eat the right food, to speak English without an accent, to become Episcopalians. So when I heard that story, I was like, well, that's horrible, right? What a horrible thing. The woman telling it to me was the granddaughter of a woman who had been through that process at St. Mark's, and they absolutely understood it as their family stepping into the American dream. So it's so fraught, that conversation about what it means to be right. And we were at the center of that in a way that I think is hard for us to imagine, because we're not at the center of anything anymore as a church. And so this conversation, so the fact of having a range of ways to pray, and for the other side, the other piece is a range of languages, which are approved, and we're printing those books. So it's not a side conversation that we're having. This is at the heart of us right now. And music in styles that would not fit into the 1982 hymnal is approved in our church in languages that are, in languages where that music has been written in that for that community, and it's approved in the Episcopal Church. What does that, I don't know that we've thought through what that means. It's very exciting to me, but I'm an immigrant.
Can I tell you something that's really exciting to me about what you just said too? The way you first thought that story from St. Mark's was important, you took it into yourself, you thought about it, and now you can share it with us. That's one of the beautiful things about a tradition. A tradition says there are these learnings that we have, this accumulated knowledge that we have that's precious, and stories that need to be told, and they're particular. They come out of a particular place. Oh, what a great, that's a beautiful part of a tradition that gives you permission to change. It doesn't have to always keep you stuck, but it's something you never want to forget. Yeah.
It was my wacky Aunt Sally. I'm tied to her. She's not just somebody. There's some tie that's in us. It's in us that makes that story.
Here's this. Yeah.
So I keep thinking about the phrase you mentioned, Winnie. I think it was speaking the words we want our children to hear, or writing the word. I can't remember if it was speaking or writing, but I keep thinking about this. And my question is actually slightly different after your question, and I'll say why in a second. But I think about churches, that I grew up in, and other churches that I don't take my children to anymore because they say things I don't want my children to hear. Yeah. And I don't go to that kind of church anymore. And we're having the conversations that I think we should be having, but there's also a fear in that, I grew up in a certain way, but it was with a certain solidity and surety that I don't have anymore, and I don't take my children to places that speak that anymore. And even when I put a book on my coffee table that says, "Should I stay Christian?" I'm like, my kids are going to see that, and they're going to wonder, like, should
Not
I?
you, right? Yeah.
And so, like, I wonder how we have these conversations with the young people in our lives when we are at a very different place of surety as 47-year-olds than we were as 20-year-olds. But the way my question is different is that I think part of the answer to this is that we listen to, she's the only one who's mentioned an idea to, I mean, maybe could we try this? And so I think part of it is that we ask them. But I don't know, like in your travels, in your churches, like where have you seen how we bring children into this conversation, or young people into this conversation?
I'll just say I feel the importance of that question in my travels over the last 15 or 20 years. It's the most common question I'm asked that I don't think we are close to having a good answer. But the fact that it keeps coming up, you know, there are a few podcasts that are talking about this, a few authors who are writing. I'll tell you where I think the most creative work is being done is in children's literature. There is some incredible children's literature being written for both very young, 2, 3, 4-year-olds who are hearing very simple picture books be read to them, that are being written by very thoughtful, theologically deep adults that are saying they know something about children's literature, but they're thinking very intentionally. A good friend of mine, Deneen Akers, has a book coming out in a couple of weeks, if it's not out already. It's coming out very soon. It's called Mama God. And she just said, I want to have a prayer I can read with my daughters, a book that I can read with my daughters and my sons, where they get to think about God, not just as father, but also as mama. And what is so beautiful about it is it doesn't carry any of, it's not like a big theological tome asking you permission to think this way. For the adult, like when I first read her manuscript, I had tears in my eyes because I just thought, this is incredible. Another friend, Matthew Paul Turner, just wrote a book. Oh, now I'm going to forget the title. But the book, the title of the book is something like, I Belong to Me. Now, you might think that sounds very selfish and very narcissistic and all the rest, but there's a whole generation of young adults who grew up in evangelical settings in something called purity culture, who were taught that your body doesn't belong to you, and it's created a lifetime of sexual damage and shame about bodies and so on. And when I heard Matthew read this aloud to a group of adults, and again, I just felt like it was saying in a sense that this gift of a body is God's gift of you for some space to have your own private thoughts. And it's your space to find out what you enjoy and what you like to eat. And it just made me think, wow, I've got a body too. This is so great, and so
Thank you, Mama God. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Amazing. So I have a story, two little illustrations. So when our kids were little, like eating cereal at the counter before school, they were little. One of them said, "Does Jesus get bathroom breaks?" I was like, "What do you mean?" He's like, because he's sitting at the right hand of the Father. And I had this moment of, oh my God, they take us really seriously. Like even if we're internally critiquing whatever, they assume we wouldn't bring them, and differently than I assume my parents would bring me to all kinds of things that were irrelevant when I was very little, because it was a different time, right? They assume we would not bring to them things that we don't take very seriously, and they are trying to understand them. And I think that's a different cultural landscape than our growing up. And so my other story is, someone just told me this church that his son, who's now going to college, was little and the dog had died, comes to church the next day, and in Children's Chapel says, my dog died, and he's in heaven. And the priest says, at St. Luke's, says, no, dogs don't go to heaven. And he said, my dog is in heaven. And so they went back and forth, and the kid finally put his hands on his hips and said, my dog is in heaven. It's like, love this kid, right? And he's right. Like Orthodox theology, creation is restored. Like he's a better theologian than the priest was. I think you want to teach kids things that are true. And the fact that we struggle to understand what is true, I think they get that, and that we believe that we're learning from them in a way that my parents' generation would not have been taught, and they might think now, but wouldn't have been. I mean, it's a really different landscape in a wonderful way, right? That I do find kind of terrifying, frankly, and I don't want to tell them things I don't think are true. And I think we can do that.
Trust them. We're back to trust and all kinds of. All right, we could go on all night. Thank you both for being here. Thank you all for your wonderful, insightful questions. Thanks. Buy all the books you can afford from Novel before you leave.